Chapter 1686, Waiting for God's Will. Zhang Yi understood that there was no problem with what Yang Xinxin had said, and there was no way for them to control the Hades gatekeeper at the present time, so Yang Xinxin's ability would have no space to be utilized. Zhang Yi told a few other people about Yang Xinxin's statement and then said, "Now we can only stall for time. Then find an opportunity to use the Reaper of Love to injure him." Li Changgong looked at Zhang Yi speechlessly. "Chaos, aren't you a little confused? Reaper of Love? Even though it can be fired, it moves too much, and I'm afraid that it will already be detected by the other side on its way to being fired. Have you forgotten how that previous Reaper of Love was blocked by the opponent?" Zhang Yi looked at him with a burning gaze and said calmly, "I know, of course I know. But don't forget who I am. I'll have a way to make it impossible for him to defend himself." Seeing Zhang Yi with such a confident look, Li Changgong had the sense to keep his mouth shut. "Alright then, the second battle plan will be executed next. Stall for time. Then wait for the god's punishment described in Chaos Mouth to descend." Shang Daowen said. He was also muttering straight in his heart because the so-called god's punishment was something that he himself had never seen. But now that Zhang Yi could not possibly joke about such things, they had no choice but to do as they were told. Linhai City. Newton and Canelo attracted Blood Tide and his Nian ability users here. Blood Tide and Nian had just flown in from the sea, and the moment they appeared in Linhai City, sky-high flames suddenly erupted under their feet. The explosives that Newton had placed in this area in advance all exploded. It directly drowned the two figures. Canelo looked at the violent explosions on the coast and said to Newton, "It's hard to effectively kill them with this level of explosions." Newton, however, said very calmly, "I know, but even if it only manages to cause a weak impact, it can still increase the probability of us winning this battle. Especially he reached out and pointed to the sky. The strong reinforcements we'll be getting soon are very effective when paired with such a tactic." Tianhai City was the place he chose to start the battle, which was why he chose to come early to examine the battlefield around Tianhai City. According to his judgment, the main battlefield must be in this area. The facts prove that there was no problem with his data deduction. Math doesn't deceive. He pushed his glasses while soon, Deng Shandong's gigantic heavenly Dao star bloomed above the sky. Intense ultraviolet light illuminated nearly 1,000 miles in a radius, especially around Linhai City, where the intensity of the ultraviolet light was unusually high. Blood Tide and Nian flew out from the midst of the explosion. The armor on their bodies had indeed suffered some degree of damage. They laid a trap in advance. I'm really a bit curious as to what made them conclude that we would fight here. Perhaps, they have laid equivalent traps in other places that could become battlefields. Conversations flew between Blood Tide and Nian. And the heavenly Dao star that appeared in the sky at that moment immediately caused a feeling of discomfort to appear in their bodies. It was as if humans had entered an oxygen-deprived area, and it was inevitable that they would experience dizziness. The battle armor on their bodies was certainly tough, but after all, it was only a product of technology, and while it blocked the huge explosions, it also damaged it. This also led to the strong ultraviolet rays not being able to be completely blocked out. From the very beginning of the duel, Newton utilized the advantage of geography to gain the upper hand. This time's opponent seems to be a bit harder to deal with than the previous turtles. Nian cautiously reminded Blood Tide. "That doesn't matter." Blood Tide spoke out indifferently, and around him, a large amount of blood began to flow, forming a huge blood river. Among them, there was the blood of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians of East Sea City. In the face of absolute strength, all obstruction is meaningless. They are nothing more than dying struggles. What they needed wasn't victory, it was merely finding something to do while the Grand Marshal slaughtered the enemy. Blood Tide didn't care about winning or losing this battle, because he knew that there was no way he would lose. And after waiting for the Hades gatekeeper's side to finish resolving the strongest batch of combatants of the Allied forces, the battle was over. Newton and Canelo came to this battlefield in advance. Newton and Canelo had rehearsed this battle long ago, so there was no need to say much. Canelo directly stepped back. Instead, Newton blocked right in front of him. Facing the enemy in the distance, Newton directly raised the scientific hand cannon in his right hand atheist. In the distant, Canelo similarly raised the sniper rifle in his hand. The first target the duo chose was the black and white commander Nian. In a 2-on-2 battle, priority was given to clearing out the weaker one on the other side, and then quickly forming a 2-on-1 advantage. Canelo's gaze traveled through great distances. Watcher could see through everything, even through buildings, and aim precisely at the target. Everything penetrates. He aimed directly at Nian and pulled the trigger in his hand. A special bullet wrapped in his supernatural ability directly penetrated the void and headed straight for Nian. Newton raised the hand cannon in his hand almost at the same time, utilizing the auxiliary aiming function of his tactical mask to lock onto the enemy. Canelo's ability could pierce through the opponent's defense, and even the strongest enemy would have a hole in their defense after enduring one of his strikes. Newton's hand cannon, on the other hand, was of very pure energy impact. That was why the means for the two to fight jointly was for Canelo to break the opponent's defense first, and then Newton would finish it off. The two's attacks came one after the other, instantly arriving in front of Nian's body. But Nian's eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. Incoming! Blood-Tide, who had maintained a distance of tens of meters from him, raised his hand, and the thick blood river directly transformed into a huge blood-colored spherical jade, wrapping the two of them in death. Ka-ching! Canelo's black bullet shot at the surface of the blood-colored spherical jade, directly opening a crack. Then the atheist strike also blasted above that gap with unerring precision. With a single strike, a huge gash was blown open in Blood-Tide's defense. However, Newton and Canelo did not have time to be happy. This was because the blood-colored pearl jade, which was condensed from the blood of hundreds of thousands of people, began to rapidly repair the moment the gap was blasted open by them. Immediately after that, Nian raised his hands and aimed them at the long-deserted city below. Rumble! The earth trembled crazily, and this empty and silent city still retained a large number of buildings from the era of human civilization. A tall building rose up from the ground, directly catalyzed by Nian to fly high into the sky, and then smashed over in the direction of Newton and Canelo. A dozen or so tall buildings fell above Newton as if they were toys. Newton, however, was not the least bit panicked. Raising his right hand, the atheist, in his hand surged with golden light. A cannonball was shot out, and the terrifying energy directly blasted the huge buildings in front of him directly into debris. Chapter 1687, The Second Law. There are two ability users on the other side. One is a guy with a long-range attack weapon that has a powerful defense-breaking ability. There's another one whose means of attack is a long-range weapon, but it looks like the attack is even stronger while the ability is inexplicable. Blood-Tide made this judgment at the first time. In order to further confirm Newton and Canelo's abilities, he stretched out his right hand, and instantly the huge blood-colored pearl jade began to melt, turning back into a huge and viscous blood river. Blood rain. Clatter dash! The blood river began to surge crazily as a blood-colored arrow emerged from amongst it, and the blood river transformed into a rushing river behind him, again resembling a curtain that stretched for several kilometers. Densely packed, uncountable numbers of blood arrows were aimed in the direction of Newton and Canelo, and in an instant, torrential rain fell. This kind of wide-range wide-area attack was the best starter for testing, able to see the opponent's defense ability and whether or not they possessed the means to face a wide-range attack. Canelo hid behind Newton, indifferent in the face of such an attack. Newton raised his head to look at the sky, the lenses of his rimless round glasses flashing up with white light. Newton's second law. The magnitude of an object's acceleration is directly proportional to the force acting on it, and inversely proportional to the object's mass. The direction of acceleration is the same as the direction of the force. Just by applying some force in the right way, you can change the direction of an object's motion. And with my ability, I can even change the form in which matter exists. Newton stood right where he was. He looked as if he had done nothing, but the space in front of him suddenly produced a force that could not be recognized with the naked eye. Densely packed, thousands of incomparably sharp blood arrows, midway through their fall towards him, suddenly flew towards the surroundings in a bizarre gesture. The earth of Linhai City was instantly dyed the color of blood, and everywhere, bloody arrows were deeply inserted into the earth, buildings and withered jungles. On the other hand, where Newton and Canello stood, not a single arrow fell within a radius of several hundred meters. Distortion attack? Blood Tide merely murmured in a low voice, then quickly changed his battle strategy. He waved his big hand. Styx River Reversal. The blood arrows that shot into the earth and covered a wide area suddenly melted in an instant, turning into a large swath of blood river that quickly began to rotate around Newton and Canello. A huge vortex of blood river completely surrounded the duo. The surging waves were like a sharp jagged tooth, spinning faster and faster as if it was about to impact at any time. Canello couldn't help but look much more grave. He was able to feel the terrifying supernatural energy contained within this blood river. Once he was really dragged into it, he was afraid that his body would be quickly destroyed. And as a sniper, he was not very good at dealing with this kind of situation. Newton's kept a calm demeanor as he pushed his rimless frames. Interesting ability indeed, but I've done enough research on you before this battle. Data doesn't lie. That battle of Blood Tide in East Sea City was less than a month away, yet it was enough for Newton to gather enough intelligence. The blood river vortex spun faster and faster, and Nian was also on the side, once again using his Nian power. This time he was not affecting an external object, but directly controlling Newton and Canello's bodies. In an instant, the two of them felt a powerful force being born from nothingness, as if a thick chain was binding the two of them. My lord, I have affected them. Nian said so. Very well. Blood Tide raised his right hand without hesitation. Devour them, river Styx. The huge blood river roared all of a sudden, the Styx River Reversal, rushing waves of blood rushing through the sky, jagged waves like countless chainsaws, heading straight for Canello and Newton. The duo didn't hesitate to urge the energy within their bodies. Although telekinesis of Nian was powerful, it wasn't possible to completely control them at this point. It was only able to affect their movement. The duo made every effort to break free from Nian's control, then directly activated the flight function of their combat suits and rushed up into the sky to dodge this blood tide attack. Dodging is meaningless. No matter where you flee to, my blood river will chase after you. Blood Tide simply waved his right hand in the air as if it was a baton in the hands of the orchestra's commander-in-chief, and a large number of blood turbines below shot up into the sky, chasing Newton and Canello to death. Newton looked downwards. The atheist in his hand directly launched a shocking strike. The terrifying energy cannon resounded through the sky. The golden beam of light penetrated through the river Styx, causing a large number of blood turbines to collapse. But immediately after, there were still a large number of blood turbines rushing towards the duo at an even faster speed. Newton no longer dodged this time, but once again unleashed his first law ability. It only takes a small external force to change the trajectory of a 10,000-ton ship or a heavy train, causing the originally established direction to gradually deviate tremendously. This is where the magic of mechanics lies. Newton unleashed his ability, and all the attacks that struck at him were all altered in their trajectories and raced off in all directions. He and Canello flew into the distance and dodged the strike. The duo then immediately launched a counterattack against Blood Tide and Nian. It was still Canello's everything penetrates that did the armor breaking, and then Newton's atheist launched a powerful area-covering attack. Nian could sense that his opponent was targeting him, so he also honestly hid behind Blood Tide. Blood Tide once again opened his blood border and blocked the duo's joint strike. Only, he needed to use a large amount of blood to attack, so there was a loophole in his defense. This time, Newton's attack had actually caused him to be knocked back thousands of meters away, and the armor on his body was nearly broken. Their attacks are too annoying. Even Silver Armor General Blood Tide didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless with the human combination in front of him at this moment. Although Canelo's strength wasn't strong enough, and his ability to fight alone was average, his ability to dismantle most of the enemy's defenses only needed to be paired with a mutant that possessed a powerful attack to work wonders. The combination of these two was not a random arrangement. Nian immediately said, "From the looks of it, we must also take out that sharpshooter before we can do so." Blood Tide's eyes glowed with a cold ghostly aura. "No harm done, with this strike, they will definitely not be able to dodge it." As soon as he spoke, the blood river once again rushed towards Newton and Canelo. Nian instantly unleashed his ability, pulling up dozens of huge tall buildings from above the earth. Rumble! The city under the heavy snow cover was destroyed by him as an entire street was overturned, and a large amount of concrete, rocks and dirt flew high into the air before heading towards Canelo and Newton. Such an attack, although it was difficult to directly cause much damage to the duo, but it was able to affect the sight of the duo as snipers and interfere with them. The real killing move was naturally Blood Tide's long river of blood. Chapter 1688 Bloodstorm. Blood Tide surging, a jagged blood turbine issued a snorting sound. Those huge turbines have a radius of tens or even hundreds of meters, densely cover the sky, at any time, can cut everything in front of them. Newton sensed a hint of something wrong. The other party has clearly just used this move already, and it didn't have any effect on me. Now that he's using this ability again, he must be different from before, and is having a strategy to deal with my ability. His mind raced, but he still chose to retreat with Canelo while unleashing his ability. First law, distortion attack. As his ability was unleashed, all the blood turbines that attacked him were instantly distorted in their trajectory, reeling backwards in different directions. However, this time, there were still a large number of blood turbines flying in his direction. The huge blood turbines were snorting and rapidly rotating, and it was hard to imagine what horrific consequences would occur if they were cut just once. Newton already understood what the other party had done. Water had no constant state. If the long river of blood's attacks were directed towards the two of them, they would naturally be distorted attacks, and thus be bulleted out. However, this time, silver armor had caused the flow of the long river of blood to be distorted and the attacks of the blood turret no longer had a clear trajectory. This would cause a large portion of the blood turbines flying towards it to be aimed at them even if Newton unleashed his first law ability. An attack without a predetermined trajectory could then not be accurately parried with the ability either. As expected, the opponent has some intelligence. It's worthy of being a high-level intelligent creature hiding under the earth. Seeing that the opponent had so quickly found the flaws in his ability, Newton's eyes flashed with a flash of amazement. At the same time, there was also a touch of deeply hidden excitement. Although he didn't want to see how strong his opponent was, but if he just defeated a stupid and weak enemy, it would only make him feel bored. Now he could be certain that this battle would be very exciting. At this time, Canelo quickly and skillfully put the black rifle away behind him, and with both hands, he pulled out two revolvers from his waist. A gold revolver and a silver revolver. Although he had now switched to using a sniper rifle, as a top-notch gunman and former Special Forces soldier, he was also absolutely skilled in the use of handguns. The power of the blood turbine had already been mostly weakened by Newton, and at this time there were certainly still overwhelming blood turbines about to surround the two of them. But let's not forget that as a fast shooter who revered the art of drawing a gun, the speed at which he discharged his gun could be faster than the human naked eye even before he had supernatural powers. Hazy Rainbow Dance. As Canelo picked up the two revolvers in his hands, a smile unconsciously appeared at the corners of his mouth, as if he had returned to the sprightly Western cowboy he was back then. The supernatural energy was infused into the two revolvers, then he raised his hands and quickly pulled the trigger. His fingers almost appeared as shadows, and only the sound of gunshots could be heard unceasingly, as if a large string of firecrackers had been set off. With every shot fired, a turbine of blood was shattered. In a short instant, their four sides were like fireworks blooming, the gunfire of the gold and silver dual guns filled the sky, and the Blood River attack that seemed as if it didn't have any dead ends was actually all crushed in less than 1.5 seconds time. Well done. Newton praised Canelo, worthy of being a genius that the Navy is focused on cultivating. You'll be a very powerful gunner in the future, Canelo. This praise from Newton made Canelo raise an eyebrow. Now I already am. Blood-Tide smiled instead of showing disappointment when he saw that the strike didn't work. There was nothing wrong with his verification, the opponent's ability had already been found to be broken by him. And this strike was just a test, the real show was still to come. Just as Newton was conversing with Canelo, the blood river running under his feet suddenly produced a strange movement once again, and the huge blood river rolled backward into the sky as if it was alive. Be careful, his attack is coming again. Newton whispered. Blood-Tide pointed to the sky with one finger, and the blood river rose up into the sky, then unexpectedly slowly unfolded in the middle of the sky. The sticky blood gathered in one place and suspended above the sky, transforming into a red silk that covered the sky. Such a bizarre scene, coupled with the strong smell of blood in the air, caused extreme physiological discomfort. Taste the taste of your body exploding. Blood-Tide gently clenched his fist, then turned his palm down. Wow! Blood river began to rain down from the sky in a drenching downpour, droplets of blood falling towards the space where the two of them were. Canelo's eyes stared, there were more than 1 billion blood beads that fell in a single time. Even if his gun was fast, it was impossible to block such a large number of blood beads. The most crucial thing was that they were not at all sure what the other party was trying to do, and where the breakthrough of this move was. Newton, however, said, based on the intelligence, such an attack won't cause much direct killing power. According to my exchange with Black Tortoise, he has a means to stimulate the blood within a creature's body to attack the enemy from within. And the medium is probably this blood. Canelo also remembered this matter, and the two of them glanced at each other, and immediately began to utilize the supernatural energy within their bodies, plating a protective shield on the surface of their bodies. A rainstorm of blood landed, and the bizarre power invaded the duo's bodies along with the blood, but it was directly blocked by the supernatural protective layer. Blood-Tide was not the least bit surprised to see that the duo was prepared. If you want to block my blood master, you must turn on the supernatural defense at all times, and as long as you make any slip-ups, I will detonate the blood in your bodies. So, you guys have to be careful. In other words, the duo must consume their supernatural energy for defense at all times. In this way, their spatial ability consumption would also be greatly increased, and the longer the time of the battle, the lower the probability of them winning. No harm done. Newton faintly said to Canelo, as a sub-battlefield, even if we can't directly win the battle, as long as we are able to gain time for the main battlefield, it will be fine. What's more, it's not easy for them to suffer if we delay the time. This piece of heaven and earth, nowadays, can still be our humans' home ground. The mutants of the Wuluan Empire were unable to fight on the surface for a long time. Whether it was that indefinable mysterious rule, the environment of the ground surface, and the heavenly Tao star of Deng Shintong, they were all things that were extremely limiting to them. Newton said this, reaching over and wiping his hand cannon atheist. But it would be too much of a disgrace to the mutants of Columbia to just be passive all the time. Chapter 1689 His Wife. The atheist in Newton's hand suddenly produced a bizarre change. Its body was gently trembling like a living creature, and if one looked closely, one would realize that it had been slightly undulating at regular intervals. It was as if it was a human heart. Canelo looked at the weapon in Newton's hand and couldn't help but remember a statement. Most of these Natural Science Association people were crazy. You're atheist, a biological weapon? Canelo voiced such a question for the first time. Newton nodded, a trace of tenderness suddenly flashing among his eyes. He glanced at the atheist and said, "She is my wife." Canelo's pupil snapped, "Your wife?" Newton stroked the atheist in his hand, it was still trembling slightly and the light on its body was slowly becoming fiery. We are both scientists, and have been working to explore the limits of the human body since the end times. We all believe that in the era of the Great Alteration, humans can become gods. Realize eternal life and possess great and overwhelming power. Her physique is very special, possessing very powerful biocompatibility, and can even accommodate various rare materials. This ability is very powerful, yet somewhat chickenish. Because she is not an excellent combatant, with such an empty ability, it is also very difficult to achieve evolution on a biological level. Newton's eyes were a bit mesmerized, so I came up with a wonderful plan. That is to turn her into a powerful biological weapon. In this way, she will be able to perfectly utilize her ability characteristics. Canelo didn't know what to say for the better. However, after the end of the world, it wasn't the first time he had seen such a madman, so it wasn't so bad that he would lose his temper during the battle. The atheist, in Newton's hand, was his wife, which was why he was able to utilize the most powerful force when he used his weapon. If on the battlefield, his atheist was picked up by the enemy, then instead of being able to use it, it would most likely be backfired. The atheist trembled more and more under Newton's soothing touch, and the golden light throughout his body became almost white. Newton's hand was awesome, making it burst with powerful energy. He raised his hand cannon and aimed it at the duo of Blood Tide and Nian in the distant sky. Canelo also pulled out his large sniper without hesitation and pulled the trigger. The name of this strike is called Mind Ray. Newton narrowed his eyes, and as he pulled the tiny trigger, the atheist violently shook violently, and a powerful golden torrent erupted from the muzzle. The duo's coordination was still unparalleled, and the power of the Mind Ray finally made Blood Tide feel a powerful sense of oppression. Nian stretched his hands out in front of him, protect. Telekinesis formed a huge barrier in front of the two of them, but it was directly shattered just a moment after being touched by the Mind Ray. Blood Tide also condensed a large amount of blood and turned into a huge sphere of blood to block in front of them. Rumble! The incomparably thick sphere of blood clicked. A crack opened up, and like sunlight piercing through darkness, a golden beam of light shone. Neither Blood Tide nor Nian had expected that the power of this strike would be so terrifying. Just as they hadn't expected it, they had thought that they were facing 2 Epsilon-level mutants, but in reality, it was 3. This strike directly tore through their defenses and struck them heavily. The duo flew backward a dozen kilometers away, and the armor on their bodies was visibly shattered, with large patches of armor falling off, leaving their bodies exposed to the surface environment. The bitterly cold air, as well as that strong ultraviolet rays, directly let their skin produce discoloration. It was as difficult as a human falling into the middle of a 100-degree heat environment. I didn't want to use this move. Newton looked at the atheist with some apologies and tenderly stroked its body. Because every time Mind Ray is used, it will cause irreparable damage to Karina. Canelo looked at the somewhat sad Newton, and in his heart, he couldn't help but pity this madman. Newton, be mental, don't lose points. The battle isn't over yet. He reminded. Newton raised his head to look into the distance and said coldly, I know. Blood Tide and Nian suffered some damage after withstanding the duo's joint strike, and what they couldn't accept the most was the shattering of their armor. Imagine a human entering the middle of a 10,000-meter deep sea without a diving suit and oxygen mask. What would happen? It was good that the lizard men used to live on the surface, so they didn't have to worry about the problem of oxygen, but the huge difference in the environment still made it very difficult for them. Damnable guys. Were we too careless after all? No, it's just that the difference in strength between the enemies we faced last time and this time is too great, so it gave us an illusion. Blood Tide gritted his teeth, his eyes full of killing intent amongst them. And now, I'm going to get serious. He took a deep breath, and the long river of blood in the air suddenly surged towards his body from all directions. Along the gaps in his armor, it quickly disappeared within his body. Utilizing blood to attack is just one way of using Bloodmaster. Originally, it was only used to bully those existences with low strength. But now, I recognize your strength. Let me show you all my true power. A large amount of blood surged into Blood-Tide's body, and with that, his body and armor were quickly dyed with a layer of rich blood color, including his eyes where no pupil could be seen, only a rich bloodlight. The injuries on his body were also rapidly being repaired, and even against the ultraviolet rays, he recovered as before. The source of a creature's power then comes from blood, and my blood river contains the life source of hundreds of thousands of living beings. So as long as on top of the battlefield, wherever I have a drop of blood that hasn't been depleted, I am an immortal existence. Blood-Tide yelled up to the sky. He finally unleashed his most powerful skill, blood retribution. Absorbing the energy of a large amount of blood at once was also an extremely powerful load for his body. But it would allow him to have a combat power that exceeded his original supernatural ability index in a short period of time. The aura that erupted from the blood-colored figure in the air caused both Newton and Canelo's faces to become grave. Blood-Tide opened his right arm, and a blood spurted out from his palm, quickly condensing into a huge scythe that was more than 5 meters long. With the scythe in hand, he slashed horizontally towards the duo across an extremely long distance. Snort! A scythe sliced through midair, and the duo had no idea what the hell he had done, as there was no energy body to launch an attack on them either. However, in the next moment, Newton only felt that the blood in his body boiled directly, almost bursting through his veins and bursting out of his body. Chapter 1690 Mind Ray. Canelo's 7 orifices were spewing out blood, and even though he used his supernatural energy to turn into a shield to block his body surface, the Blood-Tide that had greatly increased his strength at this moment still prevented him from completely isolating the effects of this ability. His heart was a little heavy, and he was only able to cast his gaze towards Newton, hoping that Newton would be able to utilize his abilities at such a time and solve the crisis at hand. But it didn't matter if he didn't look, this look made him even more shocked. Because on Newton's face, the blood from his 7 orifices also flowed down hideously, and even his arms were dripping down with blood. It's over! Canelo's heart thought with some despair. If even the Black Chariot-level Newton couldn't block his opponent's attack, let alone him? Newton hovered in midair without moving, but suddenly, a tragic smile surfaced on his blood-stained face as he looked towards Blood-Tide with a teasing look in his eyes. Right in the distance, just after releasing his ability, Blood-Tide's body spurted out a large amount of blood in an instant. From the corners of his nose, mouth, eyes, ears, and the capillaries of his body spurted out a large amount of blood. Cough cough. Blood-Tide covered his body, his eyes filled with incredulity amongst them. How could this happen? This guy's ability, what exactly is it? It was clearly him who had launched an attack on Newton and Canelo, but why was he injured? And it looked as if he had attacked his own body with his own ability. Newton wiped the blood from his face as the combat suit quickly injected plasma and drugs. Newton's third law. Between two objects that interact, the force of action and reaction are always equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. Simply put, forces act to assist each other. When you unleash your ability on me, the injuries I receive, your body will also take the same amount of damage as is. At such a time, what you and I are competing against each other is whose ability to bear injuries is stronger. Newton's body was recovering rapidly after injecting the plasma and medicine. He who possessed this ability would naturally prepare to heal himself in advance. Even when he took the blow, he intentionally relaxed his defense, causing himself to take more damage to counterattack Blood-Tide. And Blood-Tide didn't even expect that he would be countered by his ability, so he was injured even more. Canelo gritted his teeth and took this opportunity to directly raise his gun and shoot. Telekinesis hurriedly blocked in front of Blood-Tide's body, his hands opened up and a powerful telekinesis directly blocked in front of the two of them. Bang! A gun was fired, the pitch-black bullet instantly drew a long black line in the air and arrived in front of Nian. The blow pierced through Nian's body like cotton. However, Canelo's face did not have the slightest bit of excitement, because immediately afterward, the illusion in front of him shattered, and Nien and Blood Tide were not in that orientation at all. Distorting the light with Nien's ability, so it caused my distortion attack to be off, right? It's better to let me do it. Newton wiped the blood under his nose, then raised the hand cannon atheist that his beloved wife had transformed into. Mind Ray. This cannon fiercely blasted at the range where Nien and Blood Tide were. This kind of wide-range distortion attack could not be dodged using the little trick of distorting light. What's more, at this time, Blood Tide was caught off guard and severely injured. Humph. Blood Tide's eyes were filled with naked killing intent. It was worthy of his own attack, and it had indeed caused him to suffer heavy injuries, but as long as the long river of blood didn't dry up, he wouldn't be killed. Only, the ultraviolet rays shining down from the sky became even more biting, and now he felt as if he had been placed inside a cauldron and steamed. This feeling became more and more obvious, especially when the capillaries of his body burst open and blood flowed out. He clenched his right fist and condensed a huge blood barrier, fusing it with Nien's telekinesis barrier in one place, blocking Newton's face. Boom! The collision of the two forces erupted with terrifying might, and this strike Blood Tide and Nien managed to block it. However, immediately afterward, Newton once again roared, "Mind Ray!" Behind him, Canelo's eyes were a bit dumbfounded. "Gah? Didn't you say that using this move would cause your wife to receive an injury that would be difficult to recover from? Man, you really don't look like you're heartbroken at all when you use it." Newton raised Atheist and it was a direct blast. When he used Atheist, it was tantamount to a husband and wife mixed doubles, and it was naturally powerful. Mind Ray! Mind Ray! Taking advantage of the fact that Blood Tide's injuries hadn't completely recovered, Newton continued to launch attacks, and the person at the back, Canelo, had long since gone numb at this point. His face was like a poker, dully utilizing his abilities to match Newton's attacks. Just now, he was still lamenting over the perverted and twisted couple emotions of the two, but now he saw that it was a complete waste of emotions. After the successive attacks, Blood Tide and Nien had to choose to retreat, as it was already looking a bit overwhelming for them to fend off the attacks. And the light on the atheist's body was all starting to become a little dimmer. Newton carried a hand cannon and yelled at Canelo, "After them. We must finish them off today. We can't let anyone underestimate the strength of the Columbia mutants." He raised his hand cannon once again and chased after Blood Tide and Nien. And after the distance between the two sides reached a certain level, he directly raised his atheist to aim at the duo in the distance. Blood Tide and telekinesis had already felt the oppressive force at this point. If it was under normality, they could still tangle a bit, but the geographical disadvantage made them not dare to fight with all their might. So Blood Tide then chose to delay, waiting for the Hades gatekeeper to go and end the fight. Seeing Newton and Canelo catching up, Blood Tide said to Nien, "Their attacks are weakening. I can see that guy's hand cannon is also reaching its limit from firing it so often. Block the blow, then use the force to retreat to the sea." The duo made a battle plan and released the barrier with their backhand. Because Newton and Canelo were also very consumed at this point, it was impossible to penetrate their defenses with a single strike. Newton's hand cannon was aimed at their ability barrier, Canelo's bullet took the lead, and the mind ray was right behind it. Just when Blood Tide and Nien thought that this strike could be blocked. Suddenly, however, they felt a disturbance in the supernatural energy in their bodies, and even the unfolding barrier began to become unstable. An icy smile appeared at the corner of Newton's mouth. Newton's first law. All objects always maintain a state of static or uniform linear motion under the condition that they are not affected by external forces. However, I can apply an external force that interferes with a supernatural's ability release. Make their supernatural energy release in an unstable state.